Hi, everybody. I'm Dixon,
I'm Jose.
and welcome to the June 2022 episode of Southwest Side Stories. We've got what I think is an important episode today, a timely episode. We're going to be talking to Monse Ayala, who is the Community Organizing Supervisor with Increase the Peace here on the southwest side of Chicago. They are based in back of the yards and they do exactly what the name suggests. They look for ways to increase the peace and try to stem some of the violence that occurs in our communities and that afflicts our communities. Jose, what are some of the things that you're interested in hearing from this interview?
Yeah, I just want to hear more about how this organization does wonderful work. How they got started, and more about the proactive approach they take to curbing violence. I know a little bit about like they done like midnight cookouts and type of programming to like foster a better and much safer sense of community. But yeah, just their work with the youth of Chicago these days in general.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to, talking all about that. And certainly they are a youth focused group. And one of the things that I'm interested in hearing about is, how young people today are experiencing the issue of violence in their communities that might be different from the way that I experienced it when I was a teenager, when I was in high school, or the way that you experienced it when you were in high school, because there's all sorts of things that young people today are experiencing that we just didn't have to deal with. Whether you're talking about social media, and it's been shown that that can really accelerate conflict, that thrives on conflict. It can really cause people to become isolated and feel more isolated. And it's such an integral part of people's lives today, especially young people who it's always been part of their lives. And then, of course, there's the pandemic, which is not something that we remotely had to deal with, when we were kids. And that has accelerated, violence kind of in many different areas. So I'm interested in hearing about, a lot of these challenges and what young people are dealing with and how young people are kind of advancing the conversation and coming up with new and necessary solutions to stem violence in our communities.
So with Increase the Peace, we started about 6 years ago. It'll be this October, responding to the community needs. And we unfortunately experience in a lot of the neighborhoods that we live in a lot of urban violence and decided to respond to it accordingly. And we had a camp out a week after a shooting had happened, a young girl in front of our offices on 46th and Wood at the time, and decided to respond with an overnight camp out a week later on a Friday night, what we consider a hot block, to really, one, hold down the neighborhood, but see how much we needed a space to congregate, to connect, and to connect our people to the resources and what they need. So we took that framework. We didn't know it was going to blow up in an overnight Friday night crazy idea. And we've been using that same framework ever since for the last 6 years. And when we decided to formally partner up with La Casa Norte, it just seemed very organic. When the George Floyd murder happened, when COVID-19 was happening, so many things going on at once. And we saw that, again, we needed to respond to the community needs. So we were doing a lot of food pantry, food access work, trying to build more intentional Black and Brown relationships within our communities. And we were doing that already together, but we weren't formally like there, like announcing it. And it just so happened to just kind of harmonize together. And we've been doing this thing together for the past 8-9 months now. And really just working on, with Increase of Peace, more on the youth development, youth leadership, and public safety work and responding to community needs. And alongside our public health work with La Casa Norte and making sure that we are assisting families with food access and unstable housing. So it's been great. Our first camp out was really, and the ones that followed after have been very, I think, intentional on our end of responding. That first shooting that happened to a little girl in front of our offices, we literally got together the next day, had a public, like just a public meeting to invite everybody over in back of the yards to just have a conversation about what we were willing to do about it. We didn't know ITP was being born then, but that's how we came up with we need to do something. And back then it just made sense to us that the only way this is not going to happen is to literally be outside in the neighborhood when things usually tend to pop off, when action usually happens, and there's a lot of busyness. So we responded within that week, the very next week. And when we do those campouts, we've learned and seen that in the summers, unfortunately, right, when it does get hot, when our youth don't have a lot of resources or opportunities or spaces where they can be youth or develop their own self growth or have a job, and get a little bit of money, then we see what happens in the neighborhoods, right? A lot of mass shootings, urban violence, and crime. Um, Whereas spaces of healing this past week, um, this past week for us was needed. We saw that the tension was just very high between both sides of the neighborhood. So in back of the yards, there's a lot of different street organizations is what we use as a term, um, and we just assessed that it was too high of a risk. Knowing and communicating with even some of the outreach workers in the neighborhood that we know and we worked with before, we've canvassed before with them, and just assessing right now it's too hot. We, for the safety of our team, our staff, and our youth, and even the families out there that may have nothing to do with what happened, but live in the neighborhood, we need to make sure that they're safe first. And if we respond with an action that might be too much of a risk, that's that's going to, affect their safety. So very, very contrast. Luckily we've made the what we think the right choices, but we can never be sure, and that's why we try and assess and talking with partners, talking with community-based groups in the neighborhood, and just assessing, is this the right time to do something or not? And we just, if we don't have the numbers or the connections and the relationships, then that kind of answers it for us.
I wonder if you could talk about, the work that Increase the Peace does with young people in particular, because it seems like that's a really big part of what you do. And, what sort of experience um, do young people have with violence? And how do they understand that issue in a way that might be different from older generations that weren't dealing with some of the stuff that, the current generation has to?
Of course. Well, with our young leaders, I think we've seen the last 6 years. We know what we know, and we know what we don't know how to do. Um, and I think for us, it's really just firstly always providing a safe space for them, um, and just a space where they can be, especially when all they do is or have out very little outlets in their own neighborhoods. Um, our parks aren't in the best shape. A lot of the public spaces that we do have are not as accessible to the community as we think they may be, outside of regular like business hours. Um, and when you don't have those spaces, growing up in a neighborhood that you don't see a lot of spaces where you can just go be, then rely on just being outside. I've even heard of kids going to Target just to hang out and walk through the halls, or to their local gyms if they can on free days. or to their local stores because there's literally no places they can hang out and just be. So with ITP, we try and provide a space, and then get them to a point where we try and connect all the things that they don't see in their neighborhood and a sense of understanding of why this is happening in the first place. So a lot of our young leaders, we try and provide some sort of compensation for them to learn about what organizing is in the first place. I learned organizing by doing it. I didn't know I was doing it back 8, 9 years ago. I was kind of just coordinating a program of young people, and I didn't know that was organizing until I kind of like, oh, this is what it is. um, and this is what I wish I would have had when I was 16, 15, just a space to learn like this is a thing and I can work in my own community. I've never heard of that. Um, so we try and provide that opportunity for them and also compensation because realities are that we need money to survive. We need money to provide, whether it's to help our parents, to provide for ourselves. Um, and it's a reality, unfortunately, that a lot of our families see. And how do we tie that need of I have to step up and help my family or I have to kind of make some money on my own and we try and connect why it is that that's an issue in the first place. So getting them to a point of we're learning this, we're developing our leadership skills, but we also see why this is a constant issue, not just for you, but for your neighbors, for your friends, for your friends' families. That we constantly see that we don't have the best parks, we don't have the best resources. We have to always work hours outside of our own neighborhood in dead end jobs where we're really not growing. And we see that a lot of that is systematically discrimination against against people of color. And that's where a lot of that movement goes. Um, and we try and create those young leaders so that they can organize in their own communities. So that's really a space that we love to provide and try to do that with them and learn from them through their experiences.
So Increase the Peace starts in 2016, and then 2020 hits, and all of a sudden, we have a global pandemic, which is something that, you know, none of us have experienced. Um, so can you talk a little bit about how that's affected your work and how you've adjusted to COVID and moving through it since 2020?
Yeah, well, ooh, when 2020 hit, just like many of us, we just didn't know what to do at first. We were kind of waiting to see, well, what are the proper sort of processes, protocols, and I think for us, safety. Safety is always first and foremost our first concern. Um, so a lot of the programming that we usually do, we have year round programming with After School Matters, which is where one of the opportunities where we have our young people get compensated to learn about organizing, and even with One Summer Chicago and other spaces where we try and apply for funding to get compensation for our young people. Um, it was difficult to kind of it was very much play catch and play sort of thing. Like we kind of had to wait to see what the city and federal like government was saying and then the city officials were saying and then trickling down to all the programming and how they're navigating through that. So we did switch a lot of our programming virtually. Um, Definitely an interesting challenge. Um, and I think again, providing that space for them, even if it's virtually, um, it was difficult to have that same level of like engagement of just more heart to heart sort of experiences and conversations virtually. But it was also a space that a lot of our young people and we've seen even in our families needed throughout the pandemic because they weren't allowed to congregate or be anywhere. And with that, even our work, a lot of our work just became more. I felt busy, more busy in the best way, but more busy of just assessing what the community needed, and our community response looked very different from even just a year before that, before the pandemic hit. We saw that food insecurity and food access was and still remains a big issue in a lot of our communities. We see that with inflation and the cost of living, that's affected a lot of our families. So that has been and has been a pre-existing issue. I think COVID, what that did was just bring all those issues to the surface where now no one can ignore it. Whether you've been directly or indirectly involved, whether you care or do not care about that issue or it affects you, it's to that point that no one can ignore those issues anymore. And I think people are finally seeing, okay, this is a real thing. And hopefully for those that do get activated and mobilize with their community groups, are doing something about it. So food insecurity was definitely a big thing. And we continue to do a lot of food pop-ups, a lot of food pantries, and worked with local food pantries in the neighborhood to make sure that that's something we're filling the gap in.
Another, big issue in 2020 specifically was the murder of George Floyd and the response to that. And Increase the Peace had a Black Brown Unity event in 2020, and then very encouraging, I thought, repeated that event in 2021 because there were a lot of things that happened in 2020 that sort of died out after that summer. But you had a commitment to continue that work forward in subsequent years. So, can you talk a little bit about that work and the importance of that?
Of course. And I'm glad you bring it up because I think those are the moments of where we see resilience and when we see beauty come out of the struggles that we see the difficulties, where we took a lot of that tension that was happening at the time of George Floyd's murder, of the pandemic, all these different things that were kind of hitting us at the same time, and not being able to be socially active with like we normally would, and how that's affected our people. And decided to respond with a Black and Brown Unity Parade. We need this. We need to make sure that we are highlighting what we've always been about instead of letting outside narratives tell our story for us. And when we did that Black and Brown Unity Parade, really within 48 hours of everything that was going on, of some of the loitering that was happening in the neighborhoods, and making sure that we were responding to our community, we said we need to make sure that we're sending a very strong message that we are united and our struggles are their struggles and vice versa. And how do we do that? Um, and the Black and Brown Unity Car Parade was born, very intentionally doing it at Marquette Park, right next to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. Um, and things like that that people never knew that even existed in the Southwest Side. People never knew that MLK like was here, um, and advocating for housing rights in our community. Um, and those are the things that we wanted to bring to the surface, that we wanted to highlight and take that message back. So we're definitely doing this annually, and it's definitely coming up in the next 2-3 weeks. And we hope that people can relate to it just like we did back in 2020 and continue to participate and engage in those in activities like that, bringing that unity together and bridging those different cultures.
Like you mentioned, the summer of 2020 and the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. Um, and one of the things that I really remember about that time was there's all these, neighborhood Facebook groups, and people were in the Facebook group saying like, okay, what's happening?
Mhm.
There's a lot of, you know, people kind of like spreading rumors, and then there were things
Oh yeah.
that people were sharing news of things that actually were happening, but it was very hard to sift through what's true and what's not, especially in the moment. um, and that was like a particularly dramatic example, but I feel like that sort of thing happens all the time, even when there's when there's a shooting, when there's a murder. um, you try to sort through what's real and what isn't, and it can be very difficult. So I wonder if you could talk about, what social media has done, in terms of violence and in terms of our response to it and reaction to it, and like how we can navigate that.
Social media, I have a love and a battle relationship with it. Um, I mean, I grew up with it. I'm a kid from the 90s, so kind of was born with the internet. And even I have a hard time catching up with it. And I really rely on a lot of our youth, our young leaders out here that um, can help us navigate through that and kind of see how we can use this tool for good rather than spreading misinformation. And I think that's the biggest concern that a lot of us have in this work is just that's a whole unlimited platform of communication. Um, and it's a very powerful tool that a lot of people use. And it's kind of just depending on how you use it. So we really rely on a lot of our young people to help us navigate through that, and even ourselves trying to see um, how factual some of the information is as well. But it's out there, and we definitely are not taking a step back as society. I think it's just going to continue, right? And when it's continue to grow, just like Facebook did, and now Instagram and TikTok, and who knows what other platforms are going to be born after. Um, and I think it's just trying to gain a sense of credibility um, and a trust with our communities, including those Facebook groups, because I know exactly which ones you're talking about. Like there's different ones in like I'm sure in like all the 77 neighborhoods of Chicago,
Hmm.
where people stay updated, where it's locally, for the most part, I've seen locally run by like people that are recognized in the neighborhood, and just use it as a let's just put this information and keep each other like in the know. But to look through all of that, it can be very confusing for people, especially those that we're just trying to catch up with it or keep up with it. Um, so it's definitely a tool that we have to, in some way, shape, or form, like consider it through this work and how we can use it, build that credibility and that sense of just trust with our community so that we can, I guess, help minimize that misinformation that goes out there all the time because it does happen.
I wonder if you have any thoughts about, how this issue manifests itself on the Southwest side in general. Because I know that different Southwest side neighborhoods can be very different from one another, but there's also we have a lot in common. So, do you think that there's, what do we see when we think and talk about violence on the Southwest side in particular?
I think when people hear that term, I used to work at Walgreens as a cashier um, a long time ago, and up north. And when people would ask me where I would live, I'd say the South Side, the Southwest Side, or Gage Park, or I'll say I work in back of the yards too. And there's definitely a very negative, right, like narrative that comes along with it, and like everyone thinks it's violent, and that's all there is. And how do you live over there? Um, but they're so rich in beauty and culture, and I think we oversee that. Um, and when we think about how this image came about, like this narrative, it was from a lot of people that aren't even from the neighborhood. A lot of people that don't live here that don't really know that when you're walking in Gage Park, you're in Gage Park. And when you're walking in back of the yards, you're in back of the yards or in Brighton Park. Um, and kind of just feeding into this negative image of the South Side is violent and you shouldn't go over there. Um, and I think social media and just media platforms definitely influence what that looks like. And I think that's where the people in the neighborhoods really can get a strong hold of just gaining their narrative back and really expressing the beauty in it and the struggles because we've seen it. When I talked earlier about the pandemic, right, and how it's raised the surface to a lot of these issues where people can't ignore it, um, anyone can get involved. Anyone. Even if you don't feel like you have a sense of your neighborhood or who to reach out to, trust me, there are groups in your community. especially here on the Southwest and the East sides, that are doing a lot of that work already and are trying to move that, these pieces forward to get that funding, to get those resources. Um, and with social media being such a big platform and the internet, and even just word of mouth with our schools and some of the spaces that are in our communities, sometimes it's as simple as reaching out. Hey, how do I get involved? Um, on the other end, with even people that are doing this work already, there's definitely I feel, and maybe this is just me personally, a lack of cohesiveness where we're all working towards the same thing. Why not do it together? Um, we're all moving towards the same goal, regardless of where we might stand on different issues and different methods. We're all working towards the same thing. So even just being in the know and knowing what we're trying to advocate for as a community can be a game changer for sure, and demanding those resources to be funneled with the level of urgency, but also with the community input. Because many times what we've seen before in a lot of these efforts to help provide resources and funding and curb the violence and public health, we see that outside agencies come in with a plan, with let's do this, I have this for you, um, but without really involving the people that are doing the work. And that's where the cohesiveness comes into play.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I really appreciate the part about, like we need to work together. And with the Southwest Collective, like that's one of our main reasons for existing, that, we see there's a lot of neighborhoods across the Southwest side. And I think this is true across Chicago, but, if you stick to your own neighborhood and there's this sort of, sometimes it can even be like a paranoia about the neighborhood next
Mhm.
door. But in a lot of respects, like the neighborhood next door is very, very similar to yours.
Yeah, very similar, very much alike.
It is 87 degrees as we're talking right now. Um, I should have turned my air conditioning on today, but I'm trying to save on the electric bill a little.
I hear you there.
But we all know that violence does tend to spike in the summer. So, what would you like people to be keeping in mind, and what are some suggestions of things that you think people could be doing as we get ready for summer in Chicago?
Oh, there's so many things, Dixon. I would love to. um, I think really organizing your blog, even if you don't know where to start, it can be as simple as just your own blog. I grew up not really knowing a lot of my neighbors. One, I transferred a lot to many different elementary schools, so I wasn't really able to settle roots like that. But when we're growing up in our own neighborhoods and not knowing who our neighbors are, can definitely give you less of that community vibe and feel and togetherness when you don't even know your own neighbors. And I think that's one of the simplest ways. Like, how can you get involved with your block? How can you organize your block? Just getting to know your neighbors and literally knocking on their doors, um, and building that cohesiveness with just on a neighborhood block level. Reaching out, that's also a great way, I think, of reaching out to local community-based organizations, because trust me, everyone needs that support and that help, and they probably need you. They probably need you out there to learn and teach and vice versa from them. Um, and I think even just canvassing through your own neighborhood, I've had a lot of different when people ask me like, how do I get to know your like my neighborhood or your block? And if they're willing and they're down, tell them let's lace up those shoes and let's walk the streets, because that's the best way to get to know your neighborhood and showing presence in your community. Just like I think it's very important to do that with our young people and just showing up and supporting. Showing up and supporting is speaks volumes to building that consistency, that trust, and those relationships with your community. And I think those are very simple and easy ways that whatever level of engagement you want to be in, you can be a part of.
Yeah, I really appreciate the whole, getting to know your neighbors on your block, piece,
Mhm.
because I think that's true for a lot of us. We might know of a handful of people on our block. We might know the people who live on either side of us. I mean, that was certainly true for me in most of the places that I've lived. But last year we had a block party on our block for the first time, and it was great. Like, I mean, we met everybody. We got to talk to people that we had maybe only waved at, um, and it was a lot of fun. And if nothing else, it was that.
Yay.
But also, it helps. Yeah, it
Yeah.
helps for sure.
Oh, it does. It does. And reaching out to your local elected officials, like, have them do their jobs. Definitely reach out to them, because those resources are there for the community to have their block parties, and help them how to do it. I didn't know how to organize a block party either until I started with Increase the Peace and knowing what that looked like. So don't be afraid to reach out.
All right. I thought that was a really good and really timely and really important conversation. And definitely thanks to Monse for sharing everything that she did. Jose, what were some things that stuck out to you about the interview?
Just yeah, the young people witnessing the world today, and just trying to find meaningful ways to approach it. I really appreciate it. Not just this org fighting its way in the world right now, but also fostering a way for the youth. Um, yeah, I mean that's exactly what's needed today. We need that everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that really stuck out to me from our conversation was just this notion of, obviously people are concerned about their personal security, the security of their block, of their neighborhood, of the entire city. Um, but really, one of the ways to foster that is just the basics of getting to know your neighbors. Um, and we talked about how, in a lot of places, you might just know the neighbors on either side of you, but getting to know everybody on your block, forming a block club, having a block party. And we hope to see a lot of those this summer, because your neighbors are going to be the ones who are going to be just as invested as you are in the safety and security of your block. They're going to be the people who are going to have your back. Um, and so, really, having communities where everybody on your block, everybody knows you, people are out and about. To me, that is really important and can really help increase the peace, so to speak.
No, most definitely. I think that this summer, we don't know exactly what to expect in terms of climate or in terms of the city, but it's nice to see, these youth being optimistic and wanting to be proactive and, make our city a more cohesive community because it's built to be able to be one. Um, Personally, I look forward to summer festivals this summer. I think that they really pronounce the built environment in Chicago, and I think that one of the things that we highlight is how to make that built environment better to exactly foster that walkable, bikeable communities with community hubs and centers where people can third place congregate with not necessarily at a cafe, but at somewhere wholesome and productive and peaceful so that everyone gets to know each other and feel has a sense of belonging. It's at our fingertips. It just needs to be nuanced, and it's groups like this that lead the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we end the episode, I know it's a heavy topic, and it's a heavy time in our world right now, and I think everybody's feeling that. But we are coming into summer, and so just to end on a positive note, I wonder what's something that you're looking forward to as we get ready for summer.
Yeah, I mean, I've been sticking close to the neighborhood during COVID. I'm definitely going to be precautious this summer, but I feel like there's more neighborhoods in Chicago that are going to be doing their festivals that I hope to check out for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, definitely getting outside your neighborhood sounds great. And one thing I'm looking forward to, this is a really simple thing, but just this past weekend, some people from the collective and some people from Open Lands got together and we planted a tree in Strohacker Park in West Elston, and it's just a small little tree. It's right next to the playground in Strohacker. But as I'm out and about at the park with my daughter, and she's playing with other kids, we're going to get to see that tree take root over the summer. We're going to get to see it grow, and I think that'll be nice just to know that we can, even if it's planting a tree, we can do something to improve our communities, that's tangible and real and meaningful.